the real question is how does this process actually work and what is the process? And in my experience, I found that the language experience approach is probably one of the most effective ways to reach students at all language levels. And in order to do this, you really need to have something from the student, something that's very personal and that they are relating to directly out of their lives. Um, so if you can get a student to dictate a story to you about something, then you as a scribe can actually either keyboard it in or just write it and record the story in print. So this actually came from Sylvia Ashton Warner, who worked with New Zealand Aborigines and wrote a wonderful book entitled Teacher. And she was able to introduce this LEA or language experience approach to the Aborigines who really were struggling with their own concept and of their own concepts of their culture and trying to integrate into New Zealand culture. And she was able to use it effectively with non-literate students. So I think you can look at this at any level, but it works extremely well with low level as well as intermediate and high level ESL students. The most important thing to remember is that the teacher is a recorder and that the student is really dictating the story. And the teacher and the student need to work together on one frame at a time, basically looking at a photograph or something and focusing on that frame for the explanation from the student. Uh, and when the teacher finally has the recording of it in print, then that becomes the text that the student will use to pick out meaningful words and write them on flashcards if they're not sure of the pronunciation. So the student actually dictates the story, the teacher records it, the text of the story becomes the reading assignment, you might say, and the student picks out the meaningful words, and then the student writes the story and reads it back to the teacher. So essentially, that's the language experience approach. So the characteristics that we find in LEA are, um, reproducible in any kind of format and can be replicated, but they do have to have the same common concepts. For example, the materials really have to come from the learner, and that way the communication skills are more integrated because the learner is developing the text that they are familiar with. And in that case, you'll have a text that emphasizes the language that they recognize as their language and is more holistic. The vocabulary, of course, and the grammar are determined by the student's language ability. So you may have a low-level student whose vocabulary and grammar are really elemental as compared to a higher level student, but both of them are writing the text that is meaningful for them. And it's much more personalized that way in a communicative and creative sense to use contextualized text from the students to develop the literacy level in their interest. So in the LEA, it's really important to have some type of either personal or group experience that can prompt the story with the photos, either photos that the students bring in or some type of a group experience. It could be a movie or a videotape that was seen in class, or maybe a song that was used, or a field trip, or some holiday. And the teacher needs to ask some questions that help expand or focus the story to discuss this experience with the students. And at that point, you can reconstruct the sequence of the events and actually start putting down some type of text. But the teacher needs to focus on the content and not correct grammar, and that's very important. As soon as you start correcting grammar, all of a sudden the threshold of a student's ability to participate becomes monitored, and it's very difficult for a student to try to dictate a story if you're always correcting their grammar. So it needs to be done without any grammar correction, written exactly as the student dictates it, with all of the mistakes with grammar and English usage. I've included this screen because I know that a lot of people are concerned about, is this going to cost our district something, or is it going to be out of pocket expense? But this is a free download from Microsoft and has been around actually for a while. You can simply go to Microsoft's website and download PhotoStory 3 to create a PhotoStory. However, you will need a Windows Media Player 10 or above to play the PhotoStory. And most computers that have been produced since probably about 1995 will have what you need. You simply have to download it from Microsoft. Okay, before we get into the actual application of LEA and PhotoStory 3 with ESL students, I think it's probably important to consider some of the theory behind the practice and ask ourselves some questions. And the questions that I ask myself are always having to do with how does technology implement what we are doing in the classroom. And one of the questions that it really can't be ignored is the fact that technology is here to stay and that it necessarily needs to be a part of curriculum development. Some of these questions seem, in some sense, rhetorical, but I think they need to be considered, especially as you launch into using technology in the classroom. Uh, we have to really look at how technology can be used effectively, even with the lowest level literacy students. I don't think that a student needs to have a high level of literacy either with a computer or with language in order to participate in the LEA process. What really has to be done is to make them feel comfortable about attempting to use language experience approach and the computer and photos to integrate whole language. And so when we say integrating technology into the curriculum, what do we really mean by that? And what does it mean to be effective in its use? And I think in the circumstances I have witnessed that it is a tool that you should have in your toolbox to be used as a part of your curriculum. Um, it really is important that we actually think of how this is going to affect our students. In other words, what is it going to do for our students that can't be done, let's say, with traditional text? And to me, it's obvious that students are much more interested and compelled to participate when they have a vested interest. And a lot of the students, after they learn that the computers are not scary and that they can actually use them, find it fascinating that they can create something that can be copied to a CD-ROM and that they can send to their family or show to their friends. So there's a real important threshold that a student needs to cross about whether or not technology is going to be beneficial for them. So in my experience, technology has made actually teaching and learning uh, much easier and less problematic. But I think you have to experience that yourself. In the graduate school at the University of Washington, I was first introduced to some of the linguists in the field who are presently publishing, and one of them was Stephen Krashen. And he had 5 hypotheses that I think are really important, and probably most people who have studied second language acquisition are familiar with acquisition versus learning, the natural order, monitoring output, and comprehensible input, and reducing the effective filter. But, you know, there are a lot of theories out there, and some of them are pretty opaque and not easily understood. But Krashen and Tracy Terrell, Natural Approach, are the people that I have been reading and find to be on target as far as using the language experience approach.